Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump confirms that US forces are in a very strong position as Iran's leadership suffers rapid losses. Trump rates the US war effort in the ongoing Middle East conflict 15 out of 10, claiming Iran's key missile capabilities are being wiped out. US submarine strike hit an Iranian vessel off of Sri Lanka's southern coast, killing at least 80 people thousands of kilometers from the Gulf, as fighting paralyzed shipping through the Strait of Hormuz for a fifth day, choking off vital Middle East oil and gas flows. US Senate Republicans backed President Donald Trump's military campaign against Iran on Wednesday, voting to block a bipartisan resolution aiming to require congressional authorization. The Senate has voted 53 to 47 not to advance the resolution, largely along party lines. Turkey has said that NATO air defenses destroyed an Iranian ballistic missile headed into Turkish airspace on Wednesday, marking the first time the alliance member has been drawn into the Middle East conflict and raising the possibility of a major expansion involving its bloc allies. An independent United Nations probe investigation rights violations in Iran has condemned attacks by Israel and the United States, as well as Tehran's retaliatory strikes, saying they violated the UN Charter. It also expressed deep shock over the strike on a primary school in southern Iran on Saturday, where more than 160 children were killed. Nepal begins voting today in a general election that will choose a new parliament in the Himalayan nation, nearly 6 months after a wave of unprecedented youth-led protests and the deaths of 77 people that forced Nepal's then Prime Minister to quit. Investor anxiety has calmed after a news report that Iran had signaled openness to talks and a pledge by President Donald Trump to steady oil markets as U.S. stocks closed up on Wednesday. Investors flocked again to tech shares, lifting the Nasdaq by 1.29%. A big tech industry group consisting of major Anthropic backers, Amazon and Nvidia on Wednesday have expressed concern over the Pentagon's decision to declare the artificial intelligence company a supply chain risk, as other investors race to contain fallout from the lab's fight with the U.S. Defense Department. Now for this hour, we start with Middle East. The Israeli military has identified a new round of missiles launched from Iran towards Israel on the 6th day of the escalating Middle East conflict. According to their military, Israel's defensive systems are currently engaged to intercept the threat as the war continues to rage. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said that Ukraine's partners, including the United States, has sought Kyiv's help in defending against Iranian drones. Let's listen into what the Ukrainian president has shared.
Партнери звертаються до нас, до України, щоб ми допомогли із захистом від шахедів, з експертизою, з реальною роботою. Були запити щодо цього і від американської сторони. Зараз цими днями я говорив з лідерами Еміратів, Катару, Бахрейну, Йорданії, Кувейту. Будуть ще перемовини з іншими регіональними лідерами. Ми координуємося з нашими партнерами в Європі. Звісно, будь-яка наша допомога, тільки за умови, що це не зменшить наш власний захист в Україні. І що це буде інвестицією в наші дипломатичні можливості. Ми допомагаємо в захисті від війни тим, хто допомагає нам, Україні, наближати достойне завершення війни. Я говорив сьогодні також з Рустемом Умєровим по його комунікації з американською стороною. Ми продовжуємо фактично в щоденному режимі спілкуватися з Америкою. Зараз через ситуацію навколо Ірану ще немає необхідних сигналів для тристоронньої зустрічі, але як тільки безпекова ситуація і загальний політичний контекст дозволять продовжити
Meanwhile, portraits and memorial of Iran's late supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei have been seen in Tehran after he was killed by US-Israeli strike over the weekend. Now we welcome Mr. Sol Sadka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Sadka, for joining us again. First of all, are you still going in and out of bunker? How's the situation like there? Are you staying safe? Please let us know.
Yes, thank you for asking. Everything is good here. We get most messages, alerts every few hours, and you have to go and take shelter behind as much concrete as you can find, usually in a bunker or in a stairwell, and then the alarm passes and everyone goes back to normal life. In fact, from about half an hour's time at 12 o'clock Israel time, the regulations about what is allowed to be open will be relaxed. In other words, the Israeli military has decided that the threat from Iran after 5 days since the beginning of the war has already abated enough that some semblance of normal life can be returned to. And my guess, those regulations will be increasingly released over the next few days. The pace of rockets falling has vastly reduced, probably as a result of the destruction of most of Iran's launcher capabilities, as well as much of their missile stocks on the ground, also accounting for the fact that they've used at least a third of their missile stocks already. So as regards Iran's capability to project power in that way and threaten people in Israel and around the region, remember Iran's missiles have the entire Middle East in range, as well as the entirety of India. There's no one in India or even Bangladesh and Pakistan who are safe from Iranian missile attack. And that is being degraded at a very fast pace.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that and also raising the alarm about the situation. And Mr. Sadka, you know, as we see, you have mentioned that although the missiles towards Israel is decreasing, we know that Iran has hit many places in the GCC region, also in Israel, also in Kuwait, Iraq, and, you know, in and around the Middle East. So do you think that was this underestimation from Iran's side towards the capabilities of these regions, including of Israel? Or do you think it was vice versa? Do you think these countries, Israel, US, underestimated Iran's capabilities? What's your analysis?
I think the Western states and the Gulf nations had a very clear picture of what Iran was capable of. They understood exactly what they had and pretty much where they were keeping all the stuff. The IRGC was deeply infiltrated by foreign spies from many, many nations. The Iranians, however, due perhaps to their religious view on the world, which is not necessarily tied into reality, might have had a completely false picture of what their arsenal could inflict. Or it could also be that their arsenal of ballistic missiles was not really intended to carry explosives on the end of these rockets. These missiles are not sufficiently accurate. If you fire them at a point, only 50% of the time will the missile even land within half a kilometer of where you shoot it at. So when you have something like that, it's really only good as a terror weapon against a large mass of population. And even then, it has a limited effect against a place like Israel, where everyone has an alert and 10 minutes warning, and also usually a bunker under their building, which will keep them relatively safe. So despite firing off well over 350 missiles at Israel, they have only managed to kill, at last count, 12 Israelis. This is a catastrophe for them. It means their entire program as a strategic threat was worth nothing. A strategic threat means that they could attack Israeli military bases, critical infrastructure, power plants, desalination plants, to hit aircraft on the ground, and to hit them in timely fashion and precisely. They have none of that, none of it at all. So they didn't realize that. They were, however, building these missiles because at the same time they were building a nuclear program. And once the nuclear program was complete and they had the bombs, They really only had to figure out how to miniaturize those bombs, and they could put them on the end of the missiles. Now, when you have a nuclear explosion, it doesn't matter if you miss by half a kilometer. You'll still destroy everything. You'll destroy an airbase, you'll destroy even an aircraft carrier, and that's what they were going for. That's why they weren't particularly focused on the precision of their missiles. And it's why, because they didn't finish their nuclear program, and now will never finish their nuclear program, their missiles really aren't that useful as a deterrent weapon. They're really just a nuisance. Of course, they do kill a few people. That's part of war, unfortunately and tragically, and it's very unfair. But that doesn't provide a strategic threat to a nation. It simply provides a minimal deterrence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadka, for sharing that insight with us. Please do stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion. Now we have a breaking news coming in from South Korea. South Korea has banned its citizens from traveling to Iran starting today due to the heightened safety risks caused by ongoing conflict. The South Korean Foreign Ministry has issued the travel advisory, urging citizens to avoid non-essential travel to Iran. This move reflects growing concerns over safety in the Middle East as tensions continue to rise. Now we move on to World Report from Italy. Italy will send air defense and to Gulf states facing Iranian strikes, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has announced. Meloni has said Rome, like the UK, France, and Germany, intends to provide assistance, specifically in air defense capabilities. She has stressed the move is not just about supporting friendly nations, but also about protecting tens of thousands of Italians living in the region and around 2,000 Italian troops deployed there. The announcement signals Italy's growing role in regional security as tensions with Iran escalate. Now we have a breaking news coming in. The president of the semi-autonomous Kurdish region of Iraq, Nachirvan Barzani, has called for the Kurdish region to stay out of any conflict escalation that could threaten the lives and security of its region and the security of its citizens. He has stressed the importance of unity and cohesion among all political forces in Kurdistan to maintain the region's territorial integrity and constitutional achievements. Now we move on. A Russian drone has struck a Panama-flagged vessel, causing damage as it transported corn near the Ukrainian port of Chornomorsk in the Black Sea. The attack has occurred as the vessel named Bull was leaving the port. One crew member was injured, but the captain has refused evacuation and continued the ship's journey to Bosphorus Strait in Turkey. The attack is part of ongoing Russian efforts to target Ukraine's critical maritime export routes, which are vital for the country's maritime economy. Now we welcome back Mr. Sol Sadka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Sadka, for staying with us. Now looking at Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey's region. Now as Russia-Ukraine war continues, how do you think Turkey, as it's so connected to Black Sea, and also now Iran has intercepted a drone or missile from Iran as well. Do you think Erdogan would be able to manage protecting both sides of its border from Iran and also from the Black Sea? How do you think he would manage now?
It's no trouble for Turkey at all to that. They have a relatively powerful and competent military. They are part of NATO, and their opponents you describe on both sides are not really necessarily their opponents. Turkey is trying to stay out of the Iran issue, if only for domestic consumption. They don't want to be seen as being a part of the American attack alongside the Israelis. But the Russian issue as well is not really an issue for them at all. The Russian Navy is effectively destroyed in the Black Sea. Part of it is destroyed, and what isn't destroyed is locked up in port. And whenever they try to leave port, they get sunk. So the Russian Navy in the Black Sea no longer poses any kind of threat to Turkey. They probably never did. They certainly can't. Russian military is absolutely tied up in the catastrophic war in eastern Ukraine, where they have managed to progress approximately 100 kilometers from their own borders in over 4 years now. So there's absolutely no prospect of them projecting power to the south towards Turkey. And even more obviously in Iran, that while the Russians started their 4-year war and have ended in complete catastrophe and stalemate, the Americans in the other direction have started their 5-day war so far and have already stripped Iran of the vast majority of its offensive capabilities. Its navy is all at the bottom of the sea. Its air force is all burned up on the tarmac. Its air defenses are no longer existent. And certainly within 2 or 3 days, as Hegseth was explaining, the Americans and the Israelis, and actually any other nation that feels like it, will have free reign over the skies of Iran. They won't even need to hide anymore. And at that point, Iran is no longer a strategic threat. They might be able to get off a missile here or there if they manage to sneak past and hide them in civilian trucks. But that will itself go down. They might be able to pose a terrorist threat in certain parts of the world, as we have seen in India and the UK and Australia, where IRGC-linked terrorists have all been caught. But again, that too will only harm them in the long run.
And Mr. Sotka, I wanted to move the focus to Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has said in his nightly address that, Russia should watch out of this situation about what happened to Ali Khamenei. He was specifically suggesting. And also, Ukraine has said that now a lot of countries in the Gulf is looking towards Ukraine to help them with buying Ukrainian latest drone technologies from them to help aid in this situation in the Middle East. So how do you think Ukraine would be I don't know what to say about, is it benefiting from this situation, or is it in loss from this situation?
This is fantastic for Ukraine. I would say not only is this fantastic for Ukraine, but the attack on Iran will end up being seen as the turning point in the Ukraine war. So the current situation in the world is that you have China and Russia and Iran, and they form a little triad of nations who have been mutually supporting each other. For China, the benefit is they get the cheap oil from both of those two nations, and they supply some weapons, and they keep their economies alive collectively. Right at the hub and connecting Russia and China is Iran. And the idea was always to keep the USA pinned down in the Middle East with the threat of Iran, and thereby allow Russia to continue unabated their war against Eastern Europe, which wasn't going to end in Ukraine, by the way, although it has been ended in Ukraine, and to allow China to continue their preparations to reunite, as they put it, but really to capture Taiwan. And that, with the defeat of Iran, and Iran is defeated, even though it's not finished yet, but this is a done deal at this point, that means that Iran is now taken out of that alliance of China, Russia, and Iran, and they were the key node in that. They were the junior partner, but at the same time the key node. As a result, that alliance is over, and Russia and China now both separately and individually stand alone effectively. And Ukraine will be able to play that greatly to their advantage. And what we're seeing with Zelenskyy, pointing out to the people of Europe and the people of the Middle East that they are now the battle-tested nation in Europe. They are the ones who know how to deal with the Russian aggression, because the Russians were allied with the Iranians, took their Shahed drone designs, and have been throwing them by the hundreds per day at Ukraine, the vast majority of which Ukraine manages to get rid of before they hit their targets. And everyone now needs Ukraine to help them with their Shahed drone problem. So this adds a great amount of utility to Ukraine as an ally. It ties them into the Western alliance. It ties them into alliance with Israel and the USA, and also with India going forward. And India will be the next issue here. India, no question, after seeing Iran fall in this humiliating and pathetic way, after all these years of trying to build up themselves as this great power, the bonds between Russia and China via Iran broken, India will, and we saw this already with Modi's visit to Israel. That was one giant big hug between Modi, Israel, and the USA. That was the plan here. And I'm no question at all that India will be shifting its allegiances westwards, away from Russia and away from China and further into close proximity to the West. And we can see this is really, apart from anything, this is really the end of what people were trying to call the BRICS alliance. That's the end of that. That's not going to happen anymore.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Sol Satka for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia, to Nepal. Nepal's interim Prime Minister Sushila Karki has casted her vote at a polling station in Kathmandu during national elections as voters across the Himalayan nation head to the polls. Gagan Thapa, the new head of the country's oldest party, Nepali Congress, casts his vote at a polling station in Kathmandu during national elections as voters across the Himalayan nation head to the polls. Let's listen into what Gagan Thapa has shared.
Nepal at this point of time needs very mature leadership, experience, as well as who has this appetite for change. So I'm here. So I have this appetite for change. I have a dream for change, but at the same time, I know our strength, and I also know the limitations of Nepal as a nation state. I understand the pain of the constitution making. So sometimes we tend to forget that. So we face different challenges. So I came through all this learning. At the same time, I believe that whatever a young Gen Z feels, that this has to be speed, this has to be delivery. I completely not only agree, I completely believe in that. So I think I'm...
Meanwhile, former Prime Minister of Nepal, KP Sharma Oli, has said that the election will put the constitution back on a democratic track. Let's listen in.
यसले लोकतान्त्रिक बाटोबाट संविधानलाई फेरि ट्र्याकमा ल्याएर देशलाई स्थिरता स्थायित्वका साथ सुशासन र विकासको बाटोमा अगाडि बढाउनु पर्छ। भरसक बहुमत ल्याउँछ एमाले, प्रधान प्रजाति ल्याएन भने प्रमुख पार्टीको रूपमा आउँछ भनेर मैले पहिलेदेखि भनेको छु। जनतालाई दिग्भ्रमित पार्ने प्रयास र जनतालाई अल्मल्याएर कुनै योगदान नभएका त्यस्ता खालका तत्त्वहरूले भ्रममा पालेर घृणा फैलाएर घृणाको राजनीति गरेर यसरी देशलाई...
However, the voters have casted ballots in Bhaktapur, a historic city near Nepal's capital, Kathmandu, as armed police stood guard at the temple-lined square amid a general election seen as a litmus test for the Himalayan nation's next phase of political stability. The election comes nearly 6 months after youth-led protests over corruption and limited freedoms led to violent clashes and the resignation of then Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. Let's listen into some voters.
ये भोट से चाहिँ नयाँ सरकार बनेगा, नयाँ सरकार से चाहिँ देश को विकास लगायत नीति निर्माण ऐन कानून बनाएगा देश र जनता के पक्ष में, इसलिए भोट डाला.
The kind of change we want in Nepal, especially we young generation, are very much sure. We are very much against corruption. We are very much for us, for the people, the working class. So yeah, that pretty much sums up.
Now we welcome Mr. Retired Rear Admiral Krish Kumar Garg. He's an international affairs analyst and defense expert. Joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Rear Admiral, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, how significant is the situation for Nepal, and what are you eyeing?
I think this situation and these elections are very, very significant for Nepal, especially in the light of the protests that happened last year. And if we see the history of Nepal's elections since 2008, when Nepal became a republic, it's not been the very happy situation. Governments falling, prime minister changing frequently. So it's not been a very stable government, and that has been one of the causes of the protests that happened last year. So I think a very stable majority government this time will be the key to Nepal's future. And I'm sure Nepal as well as India is waiting with bated breath to see whether Nepal will get a full majority government or it will be a coalition, and instability has been since 2008 that we have seen.
And how vital is it for the upcoming, whoever wins this election, the government, to balance out their international relations with India and China?
I think it will be one of the toughest tasks of whoever leads the next government, because India has historically had very strong ties with Nepal. We have strong cultural ties. And for many years now, China has also been trying to develop a stronger foothold into Nepal. And at times it leads to conflict of interests of Nepal with China and India. So I think a very, very delicate balancing act will have to be done by the Nepal government, whosoever comes into the power next in these elections. And in my view, I think in the previous government, there were certain pitfalls with respect to India. They probably, in my assessment, leaned more towards China, and India was not very happy about it. So I think some course correction will need to be done by the new government, and certainly India and China both will be watching the developments very, very eagerly and very, very closely.
With that, I'd like to thank Mr. Rear Admiral Garg for joining us today and sharing that insight with us on NewsX World. Now we move on to Indonesia. Indonesia's Communications Ministry has issued a stern warning to Meta platforms for failing to curb the spread of online gambling, disinformation, and hate speech across its platforms. The warning followed an unscheduled visit by Minister Mutia Hafid to Meta's office in Jakarta. Meta's compliance with Indonesian regulations was found to be low, with only 28.47% of flagged content addressed. The ministry has urged Meta to strengthen its content moderation efforts and accelerate the removal of harmful material. Indonesia previously summoned social media platforms to address the growing concerns over disinformation. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.